Hey guys, and welcome to part 3 of my jet tutorial. In this tutorial, I'll be showing you guys how to set up the thruster particle effect. Um, I'll just run my other project to show you exactly what it looks like in case you forgot. So you can see there's this little particle effect coming out of the thrusters, and as I speed up, you'll see it actually gets a little bit longer. The trail gets a little bit longer, and then if I were to slow down, let me slow down real quick. Slow down. So I turn off my engine pretty much, and you can see the engine is now, or the thrusters are now not outputting very much thrust. Oh, I'm going to fall. And then if I start to speed up again, you can see the thrusters turn back on. So the particle effect kind of changes depending on how much speed you're giving it at any given time. So that's all he's showing you how to do next. In order to do this, you'll need Niagara, and I believe in version 4.25 it comes enabled by default, but I might be wrong. But I highly recommend updating to version 4.25 or newer. 4.25 is what I'm on, so that Niagara will look the same on your computer as it does in this tutorial, because I noticed they make a lot of changes to Niagara between versions. But if it's not enabled or you're on an older version, you can enable it by going to Edit Plugins and searching for Niagara and just clicking Enabled, and then you're probably going to have to restart. But make sure it's enabled, otherwise you won't be able to do any of the stuff I'm about to do. All right. So right click and we want to go to FX. And again, this will only show if you have that plugin enabled. So if it's not showing up, then you don't have the plugin enabled. And we want to create a new Niagara emitter. And it's going to ask us to pick a starting point. And we want to use this new emitter from a template. So we'll go ahead and hit next. And we want to select this empty template and hit finish. And we'll call this thruster emitter. So if we double click and open this up, we can edit it. Now, I'm actually really new to using Niagara. This is one of the first things I've ever done with it, so I apologize if I kind of stumble through something or don't explain something super well, because I'm still kind of learning it myself. But basically, this is the emitter, the thing that spawns the particles, so you can define a lot of things in here about the emitter, and like events that happen when the emitter gets spawned, when the emitter updates, when the particle spawns, when a particle updates, and so on. So we're going to be changing this just a little bit. This is actually a really simple particle effect, which is why I'm including it. So if we start at the top here, we'll kind of work our way down. We start on the emitter properties. The only thing we want to change here is we want to change it to local space. And if you hover over local space, it'll kind of tell you what it does. It basically toggles whether or not the particle within the emitter are relevant to the emitter's origin or in global space. So in other words, it kind of makes it so that if you have this checked, that the particles that are being spawned stay up to date with the thing that they're attached to. So this actually, we want to enable this so that the thrusters stay kind of inside of the thrust model, if that makes sense. You can uncheck it and see what it looks like on your end and see why we need it, but basically we just want to have this checked. And then next, I don't think there's anything inside of emitter state. And then let's try initialize particles. Yes, so inside of here, we want to change the lifetime from 5 seconds down to 1 second. And we also want to change the sprite size to 8.5 and 8.5, which is about the size of the inside of those thrusters, I found out. And then in particle state, we don't need to do anything. And that's all the things we need to change. Now we just need to add a couple of things. So the first one we need to add here is something that actually spawns particles. Because if you see over here on the left, there's nothing that's actually spawning any particles. So to do that, we want to do that inside of the emitter update so that it happens every frame. So click this plus button and search for spawn rate. And this will basically give us particles that spawn at this spawn rate. And currently it's set to 0. So let's set it up to something like 50. So this is going to spawn 50 particles per second. And you can see over here on the left, we get this little white particle showing up. And one thing that's really useful is if you come up here and you change this orbit mode, you deselect this, then you'll kind of get the default controls back, because by default it has this weird orbit mode enabled, which I don't know why anybody would ever want that, but if you unselect that checkbox, then you get this nice controls that you're used to back. All right, so you can see we have our particle spawning right here. It's spawning 50 of them a second, but it's just sitting there because it doesn't have any velocity or anything applied to it, so they're all just kind of sitting there chilling. So we'll fix that here in a second. But we now have our particles spawning. The next thing we want to do is we want to kind of move them, or we want to give them a velocity more or less so that they kind of look like they're being shot out the back of a jet. So to do that, I'm going to use something called a attraction force. So if we come on here to the particle update, and search for attraction force. There is a point attraction force, and what this does is it makes it so that all the particles move towards a specific point. And I notice when I add this, I get this error up here. We can just go ahead and say fix issue. It's basically just saying, hey, it's in the wrong order. So if you just fix it, then it will correct it, and it kind of just brings it up a little bit. But inside of here, we want to change a couple things. We want to change the strength to be about 30. We want to change the attraction radius to be 500. And we want to change the attraction position. So let me zoom out a little. So the attraction position is where the particles are going to get attracted to. So if we hit this drop down and we make it a local value, we can actually just kind of set it. So if we change this to negative 500 on the x, you can see the particles are shooting out that way. And for some reason, it's a bit too long. What did I do wrong? Did I forget to change the lifetime? I think I did. No, I set the lifetime. Why are they going so fast? Ah, right. Okay, so this actually is right. We're just not scaling them yet, so it'll look a lot better once we start scaling them. So now that we have them kind of shooting out the back, we want to scale them so that they start big and then they end small or completely gone, like scaled all the way down to 0. So to do that, we can add a little scale module thing. So click this and search for scale sprite. We want this scale sprite size, so go ahead and select that. And then over here, we want to change this to be based off of a float value. So we can hit this drop down and search for vector 2D from float. And so whatever we type right here, so say we type 10, you can see it scales it up to 10. We type 0.5, it scales it down by half. But we don't want to just set a value here. We actually want this value to be based off the current age of the particle. So when a particle first spawns, it's going to have an age of 0, and then when it dies, it's going to have an age of 1. So we want to take the current age of it and multiply it by, or use that as the scale, basically. So to do that, we're going to search for multiply float, and then we want to do 1 minus, so we'll search for 1 minus, and we want 1 minus the age. So we search this drop down and search for age. We want the normalized age. So the normalized age is just normalized between 0 and 1, and the age is the actual age. So we want normalized age. And then we can set B, which is the scale value. So we set this to something like 5. You can see it starts out scaled 5, and then as it dies, it goes down to 0 scale. So now we kind of have this thruster effect. And you won't, I know it kind of looks like an ice cream cone, but you won't actually see this part because it'll be inside of the thruster, and it'll just look like a thruster once we're done. Okay, so I'm just going to hit apply and save. So this is our emitter. But we want to create a version of this so that we can modify it at runtime. So if we come back here to the content browser and we right click on this and we say create Niagara system, it's going to create a new Niagara system from this emitter. So this is our actual Niagara system that we're going to be spawning. So we'll call this thruster system. So if we open this up, it's going to look super familiar. It has this thruster system on the left, and then it has our emitter that we just created on the right. And so all these settings are exactly the same as the settings over here. So any changes we make to these settings are not going to get applied to this emitter. So basically we can say, hey, I want this specific instance of this emitter to have a lifetime of, just as an example, a lifetime as 10. If we change it here, you'll see now these particles have, it's back to that stupid orbit mode. Now these particles have a lifetime at 10, so they're going much further. But you see, if we go back to our other emitter, it hasn't actually affected it. So it's basically just the default values. So we want to change a few things. We want to change a few of these defaults. So the first thing we want to change is this point attraction force. We don't want to actually have a hard-coded value here. Instead, we want to grab it from the jet. We want to say, hey jet, what is the thrust value that you're currently using? Okay, if your thrust value is 0, then we want to use, something like, I don't know, -50 maybe. And so it just has a little tiny bit of thrust coming out the back. But if you're fully, if the thrusters are on full throttle, then we want to use something like 500 so that there's a really long trail applied to it. So to do that, we can hit this drop down and search for user, and it'll say read from new user parameter. So if we click on that, it will convert it to a user parameter. Now it won't actually show that it's thrusting anymore because it's expecting a value to be passed here, and we're not currently setting one. But once we set one in code, you'll see the thrust will come back. So let's go ahead and kind of test this out real quick, and then we'll set the colors on it. So compile, save, and back here in our jet, we want to add a few things. So let's go back to the event graph, and after begin play, we want to update, or no, we want to create our two particle effects and attach them to the thrusters. So actually, to do that, we're going to need to add some sockets real quick to our fuselage. So come back to our fuselage model, our static mesh, and we want to add some sockets, just like these red sockets up here, but we want to add them to the thrusters. So over here on the right, hit create socket, and we'll call this thruster L. And if we take it and we drag it, and I'm going to switch my mode to back, like so, if it lets me, there we go. And then zoom in a little. All right, so we basically want to center it. I'm going to turn this down to 1. Basically, come on, Unreal, work with me. All right, we want to set this down to 1, and then try to just get it somewhat centered. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. And then once we have that one, we can hold down Alt, and then drag to create a new one, and put it in the middle of the other one. And we want to rename this one to thruster R. And then let's go back into top view maybe. Yeah, top view works. And then these actually look like they're in pretty good places because I kind of wanted them to be inside. So if we go back to perspective, you can see they're kind of deep inside of the thrusters. So this is where our particles will spawn from. So if we come back here to our jet now, we can say spawn Niagara. Yeah, spawn system attached is what we want under the Niagara namespace. So hook this up. And the system template is our thruster system, and we want to attach to the fuselage. And the attachment point is thruster L. And we want to change the location type to snap to target, including scale. And we want to take this and we want to promote it to a variable. And we'll just call this our left thruster effects. And then we're going to do the same thing. So just copy this again, paste it, and we'll change this to thruster R because we want to spawn 2 of them. And then again, we'll promote this to a variable and call it right thruster FX. Oh no, that's right, yeah. So we have our left thruster attached to our thruster L, and our right thruster attached to our thruster R. So if we go ahead and we just run this now, let me save everything real quick. We should see them showing up and at least playing. They're not going to be the right color yet, and they're not going to be updating yet based on how fast you're going, but they should at least show. All right, so we press play, and you can see they are showing. They're there, but again, they're not coming out the back of the jet yet because we don't have any value set for our force point or whatever that thing's called. So that's what we're going to do next. And then we'll set the color and then we'll be done. So inside of the event tick, let's create a new function up here. I'm just going to say new function, and we'll call it update thrusters, drag it into the private section and mark it as private. And so inside of here, we want to grab our left thruster, and we want to say set Niagara Niagara variable, and we want the one for vector 3 since it's a vector 3. I'll hook that up. And the variable name, if we go back to our particle effect and look, it's called user, and then this needs to have a dot right here. So it's called user dot attractor position. So if we come back here, say user dot attractor position. And again, like we were saying before, if the thrusters are off, we want the position to be like, -50 or maybe even like something closer to 0. And if the thrusters are fully throttled up, we want to set it to something like -500. So it shows a really long beam. So we'll use that map clamp range function, my favorite one. Let's go ahead and split this because we only want to affect the X value. And the value we're going to be looking at is, of course, our thrust speed. So where's our thrust speed? Grab our thrust speed. The end range is going to be from 0 to whatever our max thrust is. So drag in max thrust speed. And if it's 0, we want to use something, we'll just go with like -10. And if we're fully throttled, we want to go to -500. And one thing to note here, this -500 value, the absolute value of it, so 500 has to be less than this attraction radius. If you try to make it something like 600 over here, it's just not going to work because 600 is greater than 500. So if you want to use a higher number, you're going to need to bump this number up as well. Just an FYI. All right, and then we want to do the exact same thing for the right thruster. So we'll just copy this and we'll replace left with right. So drag in right, and we can just use this value again. File save all. And then back in our event graph, once this finishes saving our map again, we want to just call this inside of the event tick, and then we should be able to see our thruster updating. So go back to our event graph, and I'm going to put it right in between here. So we'll say update thrusters, hook that up, and let's go ahead and run it. So you can see right away our thrusters come out, and if we speed up, you'll see it'll grow a little bit. And when we slow down, you'll see they go back in. Now, the last thing we need to do is change the color, because obviously we don't want them to be super bright white like that. So let's go to our thruster system. Make sure you go to the system and not the emitter. And inside of here, we want to add a color. So hit particle update and search for color. And this part is a little tricky for me to understand how this actually works, but let's see, how do you do this? You can double click, no, how do you do this? I forgot how I do this. I think you hit here and you say curve, yeah, color from curve, search color from curve, and then if you right click on this and say show curves, and then kind of extend it, how do I do this? I'm very new to this Niagara system, yes, okay. So now we kind of have our colors as a curve. So we zoom out here, we actually have 4 different curves going here. They're kind of hard to see because they're all stacked on top of each other. But we have blue, green, red, and then this white one is alpha. So the alpha one, we want to just have it going like this, from 1 to 0. We kind of don't really want any green. So let's see if we can drag this green. There might be a better way to do this, but I don't really know how to do it. So let's just drag this green down here and delete this one and drag the other green one down here as well, like to 0, because we don't want it to really be anything, because we don't want green. We want it to, let me drag the blue. So we want it to start out like red, maybe. I don't really know how this is supposed to look, but I'm just kind of guessing. So we want it to start out red, and then, let's see, how do we get it more blue, or less blue? Why is it so, yes, okay, here we go. So start out red, and then I'm going to delete this because I only want 2 pins, and then kind of go to a blue color. So I know that I'm not doing this like super technically, but we wanted to go from 0 to 1 and kind of fade from red-ish. Maybe drag both of these up to give it more of an orangish color. I'm not an artist, okay? So yeah, just deal with it. And maybe more blue at the end. There, something like that. Starts out red, gets blue. I don't know how far it works, but whatever. You can play with those colors as much as you want. Okay, so let's just save everything again, and then as soon as we run this, we should see particles that are coming out red and then kind of fading to blue as they die out. Again, sorry that it takes so long to save. I don't know why it does that exactly. All right, so we hit play. Ooh, there we go. So we have nice red coming out of the thrusters themselves, then we have a nice little blue trail. And it looks pretty nice. And I'm going to try not to crash. And then if I slow down, you'll see that they should go in pretty far. And they do. So now there's less thrust, and then we speed up again, and we get more thrust, just like that. So yeah, you can feel free to adjust that particle effect to your own liking. Obviously, this is just the beginning of what you can do with this jet. There's plenty of stuff to add, like crashing and all that good stuff and landing. But this should give you a really good foundation. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and consider subscribing. Thanks.